Coming up,
What happened to Janine Balding was absolute disgrace and tragedy.
his file was marked never to be released.
This was a horrific crime.
So why, 35 years later, are so many experts saying
We don't know whose DNA that belongs to.
the evidence used to convict this murderer
The confession. Many questions about
doesn't stack up?
Why does it move you so? Well, it's just so unjust.
That's next on 60 Minutes.
Rotting in prison for 36 years now, Stephen Shorty Jamieson's file is marked never to be released. He's one of Australia's most reviled criminals. That's because in 1988, Jamieson was the ringleader of a group of young thugs who abducted, raped and murdered 20-year-old Janine Balding. It was a truly shocking crime. But Jamieson has always denied any involvement in the murder. He says he wasn't even there. So what, you might think? Crims lie. Well, that's true, but the evidence doesn't. And in the case of Stephen Shorty Jamieson, there are now a number of eminent experts who've studied his file and are questioning his conviction. These days, this patch of land on the side of Sydney's M4 would barely draw the attention of passing motorists. But this dried-up dam is the site of one of Australia's most heinous crimes.
Janine Balding's half-naked body was found bound and gagged in a shallow dam at Minchinbury in September 1988. The 20-year-old had been abducted at
The sickening details of Janine Balding's final hours are still difficult to comprehend all these years later. Abducted at knife point, repeatedly raped and then brutally murdered. What happened to her haunted the entire country.
According to police, she was dragged screaming for about 100 metres to the dam where she was drowned.
For more than 3 decades, Stephen Shorty Jamieson has been known as the ringleader of the group responsible.
The gang was at Central Railway Station when they decided to, quote, find a woman and rape her.
Convicted of unspeakable brutality, he spent more than half his life behind bars, where most people think he belongs.
The jury was in no doubt guilty of a long list of charges, including murder and abduction.
As it stands, he'll never be released. But Stephen Jamieson has always insisted he's been locked up for crimes he didn't commit.
Well, I was trying to tell him I had nothing to do with it.
That he's not a villain, but a victim of mistaken identity. For years, he's been attempting to prove that, but every time he's been dismissed by the police, by the courts, and seemingly by science. Now he's trying again, and the New South Wales Supreme Court is set to rule on whether the case against him should be reopened. What happened to Janine Balding is surely one of the worst crimes ever committed in this country. And the idea of once again re-examining the case against Stephen Jamieson will be distressing to many, especially her family. To be clear, we are not advocating for Jamieson or his release. But even convicted criminals deserve to have new evidence considered in exceptional circumstances. Tonight, how the possibility of new forensic evidence is driving a re-examination of an old conviction.
There's a reason that so many defence lawyers have never ever given up.
We introduce you to the experts who are demanding the case against Stephen Jamieson be reopened.
I've had serious doubts as to the process by which he was convicted.
From lingering questions over another person of interest.
We told all our lawyers, listen, this isn't the real Shorty, you got the wrong Shorty.
To concerns about the confession that put him behind bars.
I do not think it was his exact words. It can't be his exact words.
For the first time since his conviction, you'll hear from Jamieson himself.
There's no way I'd sign myself up for a crime I didn't do.
And from his co-offenders, who still maintain he wasn't with them that night in 1988. Tonight, you can make up your own mind. Is one of the monsters responsible for Janine Balding's rape and murder potentially an innocent man.
I can't wait till I'm out of here.
At the heart of Stephen Jamieson's bid for freedom is a key piece of crime scene evidence, a black bandana that was used to gag Janine Balding before she was drowned. Tested over and over again, there's never been a DNA match to Jamieson. But 10 years ago, advances in technology extracted unidentified male DNA. Now Jamieson wants it tested against another man, who was also investigated at the time. But the New South Wales police are refusing to, at least not without a fight.
As a lawyer, you can't just look away or walk away when you see an injustice like that.
At 77, Peter Breen is a semi-retired lawyer. For the last few years, Stephen Shorty Jamieson has been his only client.
Many people would say you've been defending the indefensible. How do you respond?
I'm very grateful to be defending the indefensible when it's an innocent person. It came on my desk 22 years ago, and for better or worse, it's still there.
It's a long time to be tied to one case, but Breen has steadfastly acted as Jamieson's constant advocate, never wavering in his belief that his client is innocent, despite the awful crimes he's been convicted of.
It's my last case, my last file, and I just can't throw it away until it's resolved.
A resolution for Breen is nothing short of Jamieson being cleared, and he believes there's one thing that will free his client.
For many years, you've been focused on one piece of evidence in this case, a bandana.
Yes.
Why so?
It's got DNA on it that hasn't been identified. And for 20 years, I've been trying to get the police and the health department to test the other DNA.
What Breen and Jamieson have been trying to prove is that the bandana used to gag Janine Balding implicates someone else. His name is Mark Wells. And like Stephen Jamieson, he was known as Shorty. Incredibly, he's twice said he was there the night Janine Balding was killed. Mark Wells and Stephen Jamieson knew each other on the streets of Sydney. At 150 centimetres, Wells is just 1 centimetre taller than Jamieson, and his distinctive commando look often included a bandana. He's the man that Jamieson's co-offenders also say was actually with them the night Janine Balding was killed. But while the bandana found on Balding has been repeatedly tested against Jamieson with no match, it has never been tested against Wells. In fact, up until recently, the New South Wales Police didn't even have a sample of Wells's DNA.
Having somebody's DNA available to compare against crime scene DNA is the most basic requirement. That's not complicated at all. That is basically the first thing you make sure that you have. So the fact that the lab didn't have that is a significant failure.
That failure, according to Dr. Kirsty Wright, one of Australia's most prominent forensic scientists, has meant attempts by Breen and Jamieson to have the bandana tested against Wells have been futile.
Why is it so vital that it is compared?
Well, it answers the key question. The key question is the bandana belonging to Mark Wells? Was he the wearer of the bandana? Because if Mark Wells's DNA is found on that bandana, it casts some serious doubt over Jamieson's guilt. It's the central question, and it's been asked again and again and again. So the lab has received this bandana for testing in 2003, 2005, 2006, 2008, 2014, 2019 and 2023. So 7 times over the last 20 years, this lab is being asked to answer this question. And for the last 20 years, it's been impossible for the lab to answer that question. And I just find that just completely ridiculous.
But everything changed earlier this year when police revealed they had obtained a sample of Wells's DNA. So far, though, they have refused to test it, saying legislation prevents it. What makes it even more astounding is that over the past 10 years, enhanced technology has extracted 5 unidentified male profiles on the bandana.
The discovery of this unknown profile or profiles on the bandana, does that tell us that aside from those in jail, there is somebody else out there in Australia who at some time has been in touch with the bandana?
That's correct. So the new testing shows that there's male DNA on this bandana, and we don't know whose DNA that belongs to.
But that person, that male, could feasibly be a suspect.
Correct. It's not Jamieson, so Jamieson has been excluded, but we don't know if it's Wells's DNA or not. So we just simply don't know who this unknown DNA profile has come from.
We are not suggesting Mark Wells is guilty of Janine Balding's rape and murder, and even a positive match on the bandana doesn't mean he was involved. But it would cast significant doubt over Jamieson's conviction and turn this case on its head. It's why the Supreme Court has been asked to order the New South Wales Police to test the bandana. DNA evidence didn't convict Stephen Jamieson, but it just might set him free. Coming up, how a nickname sent police on a nationwide hunt to get Shorty.
How unusual or usual is that in your experience that 4 of the co-accused would say, hang on, he's not the guy?
4 is absolutely off the planet.
Michelle Reuters has a job few would want, fighting for prisoners who claim to be wrongfully convicted. As a professor at the Royal Melbourne Institute of Technology, the former lawyer is also the director of the Bridge of Hope Innocence Initiative, and investigating Stephen Jamieson's conviction dominates her work.
Michelle, you take on cases that no one else wants to touch. Why?
Because no one else wants to touch them. Sometimes people have no option, no one believes in them. So someone, has to have another look if it deserves having another look.
And how do you know if something deserves having another look?
When you can see something has probably gone wrong, we've got the benefit of a lot of hindsight. So that gives us an opportunity to sit back and see where the gaps are, see perhaps who should have been questioned, who wasn't, see what evidence perhaps should have been collected that wasn't collected. And that's what we do. We go and look for it.
Having delved into the details of Stephen Jamieson's case, Michelle is troubled by what she's found.
The potential is that an innocent man has been in prison for 35 years for something that he didn't commit.
The crime Jamieson is convicted of is burned into the minds of many Australians. On the 8th of September 1988, 20-year-old Janine Balding got off the train at Sutherland Station in Sydney after finishing work in the city. As she approached her car, she was intercepted by a gang of street kids who used a knife to force her into the back seat before driving west of the city.
The semi-naked body of Janine Balding was found early Saturday morning. The 20-year-old Building Society clerk had been raped. Her body was still bound and gagged.
Her murder devastated her close-knit family and terrified the community. But within a couple of days, the police had rounded up most of the suspects. 14-year-old Bronson Blessington, 16-year-old Matthew Elliott, 15-year-old Wayne Wilmot, and 18-year-old Carol Ann Arrow. The street kids told police there was another accomplice, an older man by the name of Shorty. Wilmot also said his name was Mark, but police seemed to have used that information selectively. 2 weeks later, they arrested 22-year-old Stephen Shorty Jamieson on the Gold Coast.
What sort of state was Jamieson in and what happened?
He was stoned and he still had a bottle of alcohol with him. So he's absolutely unfit for interview. He vomits when he gets into the interview room. There's no medical assessment of his ability to take part in an interview at all.
But for several hours, Jamieson was interviewed by detectives, and according to those officers, he described in extraordinary detail what happened the night Janine Balding was murdered.
It's alleged Jamieson admitted getting some rope from the girl's car when two of his co-accused said they were going to kill her.
He then signed a confession, and it was all police needed to charge him and hold him, with his co-accused pending a trial.
Well, I walked into the cell. Well, they spotted me first, and then they said to me, what are you doing here?
This is the first time Stephen Jamieson has spoken publicly about the events leading up to his conviction. This audio was recorded with his permission during a phone call with Michelle from prison late last year.
I said, I'm being charged with the same thing, basically you have been charged with. They said, but you had nothing to do with it. I said, I know that. And that's when a couple of them spoke to their lawyers and said that they've got the wrong person. The coppers have arrested the wrong person.
According to the others, the man who was with them was not Stephen Shorty Jamieson, but Mark Shorty Wells, something they've maintained ever since.
We told all our lawyers, listen, this isn't the real Shorty, you got the wrong Shorty.
This is one of Jamieson's co-offenders, Matthew Elliott, speaking from jail last year.
He wasn't here now.
How unusual or usual is that in your experience that four of the co-accused would say, hang on, he's not the guy?
Four is absolutely off the planet. It would be unusual for one person to say that.
When Jamieson's case got to court, the existence of a potential alternate suspect caused enough concern for the judge to abort the trial and order police to find Wells and investigate.
Is Wells eventually tracked down by police?
Yeah, Wells is tracked down and he's given a statement to the police officer who finds him, and which suggests that he was involved.
But Wells wasn't placed under arrest. He wasn't put into a lineup, and his DNA wasn't taken. In fact, despite his disclosures, Wells, who suffered from schizophrenia, was considered to be an unreliable witness and was ruled out as a suspect. It meant Stephen Jamieson went back to trial in 1990. Police had found new witnesses, and he was convicted with Elliott and Blessington of the barbaric crimes.
The jury was in no doubt. In just 2 hours, they found the trio guilty of a long list of charges, including murder and abduction.
They were jailed for life and eventually ordered never to be released. For the public, that was the end of the case that had captivated the country. But Jamieson kept on appealing his convictions. Then in 2002, the Police Integrity Commission started looking at the case and the police conduct surrounding it. Once again, Jamieson pleaded his innocence, and his co-accused insisted he wasn't with them on that awful night. Mark Wells was also re-interviewed, and we can reveal what he said in secret hearings. He denied taking part in the rape and murder of Janine Balding, but in a rambling and erratic interview also said he was at the crime scene. Also curious to the officers questioning him was the fact he turned up wearing a bandana. But even still, the Integrity Commission couldn't corroborate claims of police wrongdoing. Coming up was the confession that condemned Stephen Jamieson to a life behind bars improperly obtained.
The jury reached their verdict on the basis that this record of interview was his exact words. It can't be his exact words.
For 36 years, a correctional centre has been Stephen Jamieson's home. And as it stands, this is where he'll spend the rest of his life, having been convicted of the abduction, rape and murder of Janine Balding in 1988.
I wouldn't put my worst enemy in this place. Well, I've had several attempts on my life. I've been severely beaten, been jumped, been bashed, almost stabbed, basically taunted severely about what happened, about why I'm in jail. It's not good.
There are few people who have any sympathy for Jamieson, He did, after all, confess to the vile crimes that put him behind bars. Signed and stamped on the 22nd of September 1988, this record of interview was said to be a verbatim account of what unfolded when police first spoke to Jamieson. There is no audio or video recording of it, but it's the evidence that carried the most weight in the courtroom.
The record of interview played a significant part in the conviction. Should it have?
Well, I'm sitting here because I don't think it should have. I think there's many questions about it.
Professor Helen Fraser is a forensic evidence expert at Melbourne University. She specialises in transcription. She's clear she's not an advocate for Stephen Jamieson, but having analysed his police record of interview, she has serious concerns about his conviction.
The jury reached their verdict on the basis that this record of interview was his exact words, and it was not his exact words.
You're utterly certain?
So it can't be his exact words. When you look at it, it doesn't ring like a transcript of a spoken interview.
Conducted over almost 3 hours, a typewriter was used by one of the investigating officers to take down the words Stephen Jamieson said. Professor Fraser's issues centre around the timing records of the interview.
Well, the first concern was about that first section of 2 pages, where the first break was after 15 minutes. And that's an awful lot of words to type in 15 minutes, whether it's verbatim, accurate, inaccurate, whatever. Just to sit down and type that many words in 15 minutes is quite a feat. You'd have to be typing well over 60 words per minute, and you see there's quite a bit of formatting there. Remember in those days, to do underlining, you didn't just highlight and click. You had to go back. So all of that takes more and more time. 60 words a minute is far faster than I can type, and I type every day.
And typists here, the police officer did tell the court they were a slow typer.
Indeed. A lot of the questions that I'm asking are questions that you don't have to think for very long to realise that they're just common sense questions.
And to be clear, you're saying with all your scientific background and your credibility on the line, there is no way those words were Jamieson's exact words?
Yeah. Or the police officer's exact words. Let's face it, in 1988, there were police that did verbal suspects, and that's not me saying that. That's been demonstrated by royal commissions. We've changed the law because of it.
What's verballing?
Verballing is specifically when you say somebody made a verbal confession that they didn't actually.
Inventing a confession.
Fabricating, I think, is the word that's usually used.
We've spoken to one of the police officers who took part in the interview with Stephen Jamieson. He denies that anything improper took place and maintains the police record of interview is accurate.
The evidence that convicted him, the principal evidence that convicted him, would not have convicted him in today's day and age.
Peter O'Brien is another lawyer who's been working with Stephen Jamieson. For 9 years, he's acted for him pro bono and has serious doubts as to the process by which he was convicted.
What are your concerns about the confession which Jamieson is said to have made?
Well, firstly, the confession wasn't recorded. And so there'll always be a question mark in my mind over a non-recorded confession. But there are still problems associated with the circumstance in which it was said to have been made. There's no doubt that Stephen Jamieson, when he was picked up by police in Queensland, was in an acutely intoxicated state. And the second thing is, there have been linguistic experts who've examined the narrative of that confession and determined that a man with the intellectual capacity of Stephen Jamieson, he would be within the lowest 5% of the population in terms of intelligence, and his ability to construct a sentence was not in conformity with the narrative that had been given in that confession.
Like many who've looked into Stephen Jamieson's conviction, Peter O'Brien believes a judicial inquiry is the only way to quash the doubts that have hung over the case from the very beginning. And properly testing a piece of black cloth could be the easiest way to answer the many lingering questions.
Do you think he's guilty?
He's maintained, as long as I've known him, and he's maintained for as long as he's been before the courts for this matter, that he's not guilty. What I believe, and it is my firm view, is that the evidence that is available, that can be tested, should be tested to determine whether he is or isn't.
Once and for all, clear the doubt around this conviction.
Absolutely. There is nothing worse than an innocent man serving time in these sort of circumstances if he didn't commit this offence. If he didn't commit this offence, he should not be in jail. And there is a surefire way of testing that, it would appear, and that should be done.
In the 12 months we've been looking at this case, we've also been searching for Mark Wells, but without success. We asked the New South Wales Police for an interview, but they say they can't comment because the matter is before the court. Hello, I'm Nick McKenzie. Thanks for watching 60 Minutes Australia. Subscribe to our channel now for brand new stories and exclusive clips every week. And don't miss out on our extra minutes segments and full episodes of 60 Minutes on 9now.com.au and the 9Now app.